The doctors thought that they had made a mistake. I shouldn't have been alive. It wasn't life-sustaining.
Being able to change something that I could change was powerful.
It ended up being an act of control that completely took control of me.
The main thing that culture gets wrong is the fact that it's trying to define beauty at all. Why is being 5'9" and 110 pounds the standard of beauty? I'm beautiful not because someone else on the street told me I'm beautiful. And I think that beauty needs to be redefined.
Part of what is obsessive about my eating disorder is that every time I look in the mirror, I check my stomach. And so I got a tattoo there to remind me that
We are
fearfully and wonderfully made.
and wonderfully made.
Growing up, my family was pretty normal. I had one dad, one mom, a sister, and a brother.
I grew up in a very safe, loving home with two parents who love us a lot.
In elementary school, my dad moved out into an apartment, and I didn't really understand what was going on.
When I was in 5th or 6th grade, my dad had an affair.
My husband at the time left me for another woman, and as you can imagine, that was devastating. I felt unloved and uncared for and not beautiful, and who's ever going to love me again? I started exercising a lot and not eating very much. We call it the divorce diet. Being able to change something that I could change was powerful in getting me through that time.
It just felt like chaos, and I was an adolescent. My body was changing, and my psychology was changing, and it was just like a lot all at one time.
After the divorce, our kids split time between the two households. They would spend half the time at Val's house and half the time at our house.
Pretty soon, this became the new normal. Life was pretty out of control for us kids, but I just kind of accepted it. On the other hand, these changes took a real toll on my sister.
I really started to just ache for something that I could control. At first, it was just little things that I would start to control, but ultimately I started controlling my eating and my exercising, and I noticed that in controlling my eating and my exercising, I could also control the way that I looked and the way that I felt about myself and the way that other people saw me, and it ended up being an act of control that completely took control of me.
So one of the things I distinctly remember is when Courtney was in 8th grade, and they did a unit in health class on how many calories and how unhealthy a Costco muffin was. I used to buy Costco muffins, and everybody used to love them. But shortly thereafter, I noticed a change. Courtney was micromanaging what she was eating and watching how many calories things were. And I didn't think anything of it.
We didn't notice anything unusual.
I thought, it's pretty good to be healthy.
I think that in the process, we weren't keeping a very good track of how Courtney was doing her diet. We always knew that she was skinny, but I kind of felt that that was genetic because I was pale and skinny when I was a kid too. And the fact that Courtney was going back and forth between houses, probably we weren't paying attention as well as we should have to the fact that she was losing weight and she was controlling her eating in ways that we couldn't see.
And it was really easy to hide too. I would wake up early and tell my parents I ate breakfast before they were up. I'd go to school and nobody was forcing me to eat there. I would go to gymnastics or softball or whatever. And then I'd come home and I'd eat a semi-ish normal meal in front of my parents at dinner, and they didn't see anything was wrong, and I was constantly switching back and forth between houses.
She was starting to be pretty obsessive, and her restricting of what she was eating was happening a lot, and she would hide food in her room.
I wasn't in control anymore. I looked in the mirror and I knew I wasn't healthy. I didn't feel healthy. I couldn't walk across the room or walk up a flight of stairs or even run 1/4 of a mile without feeling out of breath, like I was gasping for air.
I remember shortly before she was hospitalized, I was at a basketball game, and her complexion just looked really really white, and compared to the other cheerleaders, she looked way too thin. So that was a huge red flag.
I knew that I needed help and tried to fix things on my own. It was unproductive. I was exhausted of it. Like, I didn't want that to be my reality anymore, but I didn't know how to change it, and I was afraid to ask for help because I was afraid of what help meant. I was afraid that if I asked for help, then I would have to give up control, but it really wasn't control at all at that point.
Well, when we went and took Courtney to the specialist ran some blood work, and Courtney's red blood cell count was far below normal, to a point where the doctor called us at home that night and thought that the test had to be wrong. Anybody with that low of a red blood cell count should probably not be walking.
So on the night when we got a call from her doctor telling us that we needed to take Courtney to the emergency room immediately because her blood levels were so low.
It was about 10 p.m. and my dad came barging into my room, tore my covers off of me and told me to get up and get dressed and that we were going to the emergency room. The blood lab had called and said that my red blood cell count was below life-sustaining.
I received a phone call. They were going to keep her in the hospital because the results of that test were duplicated. That threw me into a spin that this was the reality, that I had a daughter who was anorexic.
Also just devastated. To some extent I was embarrassed that Courtney's eating disorder could have gotten to that level that would require going to the emergency room without us even noticing that it was happening. Immediately began to strategize about how we could address the eating disorder, and to me this seemed like it would be an easy fix. All Courtney had to do was to start eating, but over the course of a lot of time I came to realize that it wasn't as simple as that. I remember having a particularly difficult discussion with Courtney where it just hit me that we couldn't just strategize how to make the eating disorder go away. So in that moment, we just had to look at each other and realize that there was nothing that she could do in that moment that would be acceptable to me. There was nothing that I could do in that moment that would make the eating disorder go away. So we had to come to grips with that this was going to be a process.
We immediately got Courtney into counseling, and we're on a slew of doctor's appointments, had to monitor what she was eating, and she knew that we were monitoring what she was eating. So she would eat, and then she would sneak and go upstairs and throw up. Caught her one time in the bathroom and threw open the door and confronted her. She immediately broke down, and I think at that point there was a pretty large breakthrough.
I used to think, why can't she just eat and stop exercising? The solution seemed simple to me. But soon I began to understand why the solution was not so simple.
I was recognizing Casey do behaviors that I did as time went on. I watched those behaviors progress and become louder and louder, that she was losing control too, that the disorder was taking over her.
I remember changing in the track locker room and thinking I wanted my body to be perfect like the other track girls. I remember wanting to be able to run faster and farther than my siblings. I wanted to be as thin as my sister. I looked at every single girl in the hall, sizing myself up to them. Was I skinnier than them, smarter than them, more likable than them? The list goes on and on. I felt uncomfortable in my own body, so I started to cut out snacks, which became cutting down the size of my meals, and then not eating certain meals. Exercise became obsessive.
And then I started to become desperate. I was like, Mom, Dad, like, can't you see? Like, you watched this with me. Like, you can't miss this. Like, this is happening again.
Even when people catch on, it's easy to share just enough with them about what you're going through that they don't ask you anymore.
As I started to become louder about that, Casey started to become more frustrated with me because she didn't want to be called out on it. She didn't want to have to change her behaviors, and she began pushing me away.
So when Casey started to exhibit signs of eating disorder, we were probably a little bit more on guard and looking for behaviors that were suspicious. I think in some ways that pushed Casey away.
I lost hair. My complexion was horrible. My period was gone basically right after it started. This eating disorder not only affected me though, it affected those around me and my relationships with them. I think my sister used to blame herself for my eating disorder. Maybe she still does. I also felt her pull away as I started to lose weight.
I've been struggling with an eating disorder for 10 years now. Now watching Casey do that and feeling like I was the start of that.
My relationship with my dad, I think, suffered the most at this time. I think he wanted to fix the situation all the time, and I didn't want to be controlled. I felt like he didn't trust me.
The eating disorder had impacts on our relationships, of course. You know, when you have to confront your daughter on the way that she's eating, I know that there's a defensiveness there. I think it also probably feels like an invasion of privacy.
My mom's outlook towards me seemed to be defined by fear. I think sometimes she wonders what she did wrong as a parent, to have two girls who didn't see themselves as beautifully as she sees us.
But it's heartbreaking for sure. You know, you want your daughters to love who they are. And
it was hard for me to understand how Courtney and Casey didn't see themselves as beautiful young women, because that's the way that I saw them.
I mean, look at what the young people are exposed to today. The constant media, advertising.
We see this in the major actors in films. Like, if you watch a film about a couple, most likely the leading woman is thin and gorgeous, visually stunning.
Perfect hair and beautiful makeup and is with the best looking man. It's the false image of what the perfect girl should look like. The thing is that the world gives you compliments.
It felt good to have people say that about me.
People would stop me on the street like, I didn't know which one was the daughter and which one was the mom. You're looking so good. And you'd go like, yeah, looking good.
People were noticing that I was losing weight. That felt good.
When you're feeling really sad, getting a compliment like that keeps you going. Being able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I look good today. That's neat.
But it was never enough, and it just kept going and going.
The world tells us we need to be different, and the world is what we see. And it's just not reality.
Growing up, going through an eating disorder, struggling with comparison, still struggling with comparison, I looked to a lot of things for my worth, and every last one of them left me empty. Every last one left me feeling even more empty than before.
I really wasn't making a ton of progress in terms of recovery, and I spent all day comparing myself to people, and I walked into the basement of my house and nobody else was home, and I just collapsed on the floor and sobbed and yelled at God and told him that he wasn't being fair and that my family and I had been through enough with our parents' divorce, and that I am just tired and I can't do it anymore, and I'm angry, and I feel like I know that I need to recover, but it's the last thing I want to do, and just begging God to do something to change my heart, to just make it better, but not really knowing what that looked like. But that was my first time that I was God, I got nothing, you're all I have at this point. That week I gained my first pound. Since then, just the Lord has met me in a really, really beautiful way in that place.
I think if you asked me, how do you define beauty right now, I would probably tell you that beauty can't be defined by humans at all. I think sometimes I don't believe that myself. I believe a lot of lies that, culture tells us. Once I realized that all of those things will always end up leaving me empty, I think I came to this point where I was God, I can't do this without you. I'm so empty all the time, and it's because I'm avoiding you, trying to do all of this on my own. And that's when I was you know what? I'm beautiful not because someone else on the street told me I'm beautiful. I'm beautiful not because boys like me, but I'm beautiful because I belong to my Heavenly Father. I'm beautiful because He made me beautiful.
It takes faith to believe in a God who has purposed us for His glory.
There's a verse in Psalms, and it says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And I got it tattooed on my wrist. I used to write that on my wrist every single day because I needed the reminder so much.
Beauty is in the eyes of God. Like God made us, God planned us.
Part of what is obsessive about my eating disorder is that every time I look in the mirror, I check my stomach. And so I got a tattoo there to remind me that I am made in His image and I am His child, and that's what makes me beautiful.